protect universal rights, drawing on Jewish values and Jewish experience. We believe that as a community that's a speaker by experience, we have a moral authority, and with it the moral duty to speak out and act in solidarity when other vulnerable and marginalized groups experience what we once experienced. On the 9th of December 2021, the Independent Uyghur Tribunal found that the Chinese government's deliberate, systematic, and concerted policy of population reduction through forcible sterilization and forced abortions amounted to genocide against the Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim groups in China. Since 2017, close to 3 million Uyghurs and other ethnic groups have been held in internment and concentration camps, subject to torture, abuse, forced labor, forced sterilization, and children being forcibly separated from their parents. I was there in Westminster's Church Hall as Jeffrey Nice read out the tribunal's judgment. I remembered thinking to myself, what if? What if a similar tribunal had taken place 80 years ago, in 1941, as millions of Jews were rounded up and marched to their death as part of the Nazi regime's final solution to eradicate Europe's Jewish population? What if a ruling was passed then, pressuring governments to, in the words of the 1948 Genocide Convention, use all means reasonably available to ensure the cessation of ongoing genocide, including conducting due diligence to ensure it is not assisting, aiding, abetting, or otherwise allowing the continuation of genocide? Well, we will never know whether such a ruling would have made a difference then. We know it holds promise of making a difference today. And we bear the responsibility to ensure that future generations don't find themselves asking, what if, once they knew and they had acted differently. René Cassin, in partnership with Generation to Generation, which helps children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors tell their stories, and Stop Uyghur Genocide, an organization that works to bring together individuals and organizations to campaign for the human rights of Uyghurs, feel privileged to hold this evening's event to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, where we bring together 3 generations, 2 stories, and 1 shared responsibility to act. By sharing these stories and reflections, we hope to highlight the moral authority and the responsibility we have to act so that future generations never again have to experience the same atrocities committed against the Jews and Uyghurs. I am delighted to introduce our speakers for this evening, who will share with us their journeys and hopes, father and daughter, Kerim and Dilnaz, in conversation with grandfather and granddaughter, Stephen and Maggie, facilitated by Richard Greene. Stephen Frank was born in Amsterdam in 1935 into a secular Jewish family. In March 1943, Stephen, his mother, and 2 brothers were sent to the first of 3 camps, ending up in Theresienstadt in the Czech Republic, where they were liberated on the 9th of May, 1945. Soon after, the family came to the UK and started to build their lives. Since retiring, Stephen has given close to 900 talks about his personal story. In the Queen's 2019 New Year Honours, Stephen was awarded the British Empire Medal for his services to Holocaust education. His granddaughter, Maggie Fleet, is currently in year 13, doing her A-levels in PE, psychology, and history. In 2019, she made a film about her grandfather's wartime journey with the BBC and broadcast for Holocaust Memorial Day on CBBC, which was awarded a BAFTA that year, and in July 2020, an International Emmy in New York. Maggie works with Generation to Generation to continue to educate a variety of audiences on the awful events of the Holocaust and of her grandfather's personal story. Kerim Zaire was born in south of the Uyghur region in China in 1968. In 1990, he was falsely accused of leading a protest and sentenced to prison, during which he was subject to torture. After 6 months, Kerim was released for treatment in hospital, from where he managed to flee, eventually arriving in Kazakhstan, where he met his wife. During their time in Kazakhstan, Kerim would be extrajudicially arrested for days. Eventually, Kerim and their family were relocated to Norway for safety. The family came to the UK in 2016, and Kerim became the president of the UK Uyghur community. Kerim's mother, 5 siblings, and their children still live in the Uyghur region in China. He hasn't heard from them since the summer of 2015. His daughter, Dilnaz Kerim, was born in Norway in 2003. And in 2011, with her family, visited the Uyghur region, the first and last time she was able to visit her family's homeland. When Dilnaz was 13, they moved to the UK, and she's currently a first-year student at university studying math. She is a passionate advocate for her people, most prominently through her Find My Family campaign, and her work with a young activist group, Burst the Bubble, is designed to raise awareness about the genocide among young people. Richard Greene is a journalist, teacher, broadcaster, and public speaker. He has worked for CNN for nearly 14 years, covering religion, politics, high-profile trials, and a wide range of subjects connected to numbers in the news. He's a member of Finchley Progressive Synagogue, where he is a lay leader, and Richard will be facilitating tonight's event on a personal capacity. So I hope you're as overwhelmed and awed as I am with our amazing panel and our facilitator. And right before I pass on the mic to Richard, please note that this event will be recorded, and we will make the recording available on our respective websites. And although the panelists cannot see you, there is an option of sending through questions at the end of the interview, the conversation part. And we would encourage you to wait until then, until you post your questions on the Q&A option. And finally, just a note that some of the topics and the details in tonight's shared stories might be upsetting, as they portray realities that have been described as inhumane and crimes against humanity. So without any further ado, Richard.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Kerim. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you, Dilnaz, all for being here tonight. And to everybody who has joined us. I see we're up to 88 joining the webinar already, which is very exciting. As Mia said, there will be an opportunity to ask questions later on in the program. I have some questions prepared for discussion. When you have a question, please hold your questions until we call for questions. I know everybody's become very accustomed on Zoom to chatting and Q&A-ing and doing other things at the same time. I think as a mark of respect for the participants, please, let's just listen to what they have to say first and post questions when I call for them later on in the hour. So thank you all very much for joining us. I will start with a quick question to Stephen so that we get just a bit of a sense of who you are. As we heard, you were born in Amsterdam. You spent your childhood in several different concentration camps, including Terezin. You made it to England at the age of 10, I believe, in 1945. 50 years later, you retired, and you chose to spend your retirement devoted to Holocaust education. Can you tell us why that's how you're spending your golden years?
Yes, certainly, Richard. Good evening, everybody, and First of all, I'd like to welcome our Uyghur friends on the show tonight. I think the four of us have all something in common, in which we are all victims of genocide in some far worse than others. And I would like to welcome you to England, Dilnaz and Kerim, to this wonderful country where at least, where I hear so many survivors say, I feel safe here. And I think probably you feel exactly the same. You feel safe here. But, you know, for me, it's a long, long time ago. For you, it's an ongoing thing. You've got family there that are still suffering. My families have long, long since gone. But just let me briefly just tell you a little bit about, you know, what I'm about. Why did I start giving talks in schools at all? And the main reason was that when I retired, as one tends to do when you retire, you look back upon your life and you think, well, what have I done? What have I achieved in my life, in the work that I have done? And I found that I was really very lucky that I had a reasonably happy school time. I was good at sport, which I enjoyed. I loved going to the theatre and generally doing all the things that everybody just more or less takes for granted that happen here. And I was very fortunate. And I suddenly realized that it's time. I have had so much out of this country in my life, marriage, children, grandchildren, that it's time that I had to put something back into the system. And when the Holocaust came onto the curriculum, the national curriculum in a sort of 1994, 1995, I think it was that sort of time, I was approached if I would give a talk about my experiences. And I remember thinking at the time, well, you know, it's something I never talked about. It was hidden. You know, 50 years, we never talked about this at all. It was something that, you know, you just didn't want anybody really to know about. And certainly I didn't want anybody to know that I was Jewish. You know, after all, you know, I'd seen what had happened to my people in Holland. And then suddenly I was asked, actually the first time, to give some of my experience actually in the local parish church of Rickmansworth. That's where it really all started. And it's from there that I started then giving talks in schools. And I have found over the years, the effect it has on the students is absolutely amazing. They really absorb it all. And I sort of feel that if I can, and many of my fellow survivors, if we can educate the younger generation about the evils of genocide and all these things that go on like that, then perhaps there is some hope in the world for the future. And that's the thing that drives me on. It's a sort of mission. I have to go on until I can do it no longer, telling my story to people, pupils, government organizations and all sorts of university students and all that sort of thing, until such time that I won't be able to do it anymore. But I keep going on, and it seems people seem to keep asking me, so obviously I'm doing a useful job. So that's how I look at it.
More than a useful job, I would say. Yes, thank you, fantastic, absolutely wonderful. My next question will be for Kerim Zaire. For our audience, Kerim does not speak English. His daughter Dilnaz will translate for him at the beginning of the program. The executive director of Stop Uyghur Genocide, Rahima Mahmood, is joining us soon and will act as a translator for him later. But for the moment, a first question for Kerim. You were born in the Uyghur regions. I think some of our audience may be familiar with the term Xinjiang. It's a term that the Stop Uyghur Genocide prefers to avoid. It's a Chinese term meaning the Western Front or the outer regions. They prefer to refer to it as the Uyghur regions rather than the Chinese name. And Kerim, you presumably did not set out to become a Uyghur activist and the president of the UK Uyghur community. How did it come about that you are in that position?
Siz qanday qilib hozir aktivizmga qo'yasiz? Qanday qilib Uyg'ur nemishqa mushelik Uyg'ur ko'mitining boshlig'i bo'ldingiz?
Men kelgen wagtda bu ýerde Uýgurlardaki palytna etmek ajizke. Men şu ýerde Uyghur cemaatinin özüne şu vatan davası milletniki şu ýerde hazır kampus bolmagan ähwal haberdar kılıp ama haberdar ular. Moşuň üçin nämişki biz oturup çykmaýmyz dep kişilerden teşebbüs kılgym üçin meni cemaat şu beşi aýtyp goýgan. Men özüm o işniki beşide men cemiyetiniň beşi bolaý dep kılgan emas, ama men bu işe gaýdakçylyk kılıp kılganlygym üçin. Çünki men Norwegiýadym, şu Norwegiýa Uyghur Komitetining gurulçysy bolganlygym üçin men şu ýerdäki cemaatynda şunday taraq goýup, şu teşkilatny kurup iş kılgan. Bu ýerdekinim şuna okşaş özü.
So when we came to the UK, one thing that we realized is that the Uyghurs weren't very united, and the Uyghurs here didn't do much towards the Uyghur cause. They knew about the concentration camps and things that was happening there. So he went to most of the Uyghurs in London, and he basically tried his best to engage them, to say, we have to do something. This is our people. This is our cause. We have to be united. We have to do some kind of actions that we can do to stand against CCP's genocide. And because he worked so hard bringing this Uyghurs in the UK united, or Uyghurs in London united, they made him the president of the community. He did build the Uyghur committee in Norway, and he did have some kind of experience of how to lead a committee and organization. So when he became the president here as well, he did run the community here.
Fantastic, thank you. Speaking of doing what you can to organize, Maggie, working with Generation to Generation, you made a film about your Opa, your grandfather, Stephen. How did that come about, that you made a film about him, and what can you tell us about the film?
So the BBC or CBBC Newsround were looking for a Holocaust survivor to tell his story, but they'd take a younger person like myself to see it, because it's displayed to younger viewers, to see it through my eyes. So I would ask my Opa the questions that younger people who are first starting to learn about the Holocaust would want to know. And then I would sort of go with my Opa and see his experiences, and he would tell me how he felt at particular points in time. But even in like his early life in Amsterdam, when he was quite excited when the Germans invaded, it was quite cool seeing soldiers around. And then through kind of the sadder parts where we visited Auschwitz, but I would reflect upon everything that I saw as a younger person, and in the view of how we can use my Opa's past to change the future.
Terrific, thank you. And over to Dilnaz. Dilnaz, you and I met for the first time earlier this week, and you made a very moving comparison between British people. Of course, after several years of COVID, there are many British people who have not been able to see their grandparents in person because it's not safe, because the nursing homes are closed, and we don't want to spread disease and make our grandparents sick. But you have not spoken to your grandmother in many years for a very different reason. Can you explain why that is?
So the main reason why I can't contact my grandmother is because we can't, basically when we call her, we can't reach to her. Every time, or still today, we have been calling her, and my uncles and aunts' phone numbers, even my cousins, and none of them picked up the phone. Every time we call them, either they say, oh, the line is busy, this phone line doesn't work. I have been in contact with my MP, and he has been in contact with the Chinese embassy. And the only response that we received from the Chinese embassy is that they said that my grandmother, my uncles and aunties, are living a happy and normal life. And they said that my cousin Emerjan and his family, so my father's second oldest brother, they don't exist on their official records. This made us very sad because we know they exist. We have seen them. My father grew up with his brother. He spent his childhood with him, and now that they're saying he don't exist, broke us heart. Like, can you imagine someone saying, "Oh, your brother don't exist"? He'd never come to this earth. How would you feel? So when I did the comparison with the British people here and the Uyghur people, the British people were still able to communicate with their relatives through phones, through iPads, using technology that we have, but we don't. Through using those technologies, we still can't contact with our relatives. We still don't know what condition they are in. The Chinese embassy told us that my grandmother and my uncles and aunts, they're living a happy life, saying that they are alive, but we're not sure if they're telling us the truth or not. Like, they might be in concentration camps, they might be working in factories, they haven't told us anything about them. They might be even dead, but the Chinese embassy, they refuse to tell us the truth. They refuse to allow us to contact with my relatives.
You told me about the last time that you spoke to your grandmother. What do you remember about that phone call?
Last time we contacted, for the last year that we contacted her, it didn't even last like 1 minute. We would just say, hi, how are you? Is everyone okay? Okay, bye. We just say that lines. We would know if they're okay or not. But the last time when we talked with them, she told us to not call them again. They said, please don't call us again. They're bothering us. And then she put the phone down. Next time we called them, so a couple of days later, we called them again. No one picked up the phones. We called everyone. We called my cousin. We called my uncles, aunts, the home phone, my grandmother's mobile phone, but no one picked up the phone.
Thank you. A question, I'll start with Maggie and Stephen on this, but Dilnaz and Kerim, please feel free to join. I hope that this is not Parliament. You don't need to address the speaker. Please feel free to have a conversation amongst yourselves. But initially for Maggie and Stephen, our theme tonight is moral responsibility. Do you have a moral responsibility as a Holocaust survivor and as the granddaughter of a survivor? And if you do, what is your responsibility?
What was his name? Levy, the survivor who was Nobel laureate. What's his
Primo
name?
Levi.
Primo Levi.
Yeah. He said, if you hear a survivor speak, witness, you are a witness too. And it's very, very true. Once someone's heard a Holocaust survivor speak, they are then witnesses of what they went through, and they should be passing that on and on and on. And one hopes that if they do that, that the whole thing spreads, like the waves when you throw a pebble into a pond, that it spreads outwards, and that more and more people will become aware of what is going on. And, way back in the 1930s and the early 40s, people didn't believe that the terrible things that were going on in Poland. There was a Pole called Ziegelboim who had managed to get out of Poland and come to England to tell the people here the terrible things that were happening in a place called Auschwitz. But nobody would believe him. And in exasperation, he set himself on fire and killed himself to draw attention to the fact that these terrible things were happening. Luckily today, people are more aware of these terrible things that are happening. But the problem is, how do we go about trying to get something done? How do you shame a government to do something or to stop doing that sort of thing? That's the big problem.
I think as a kind of like a survivor's granddaughter, it's so important to carry on sharing his story and also learning my opa's story whilst he's still around, so I can tell it in an appropriate way. Because having watched him and other Holocaust survivors talk, especially watching my friends who wouldn't have known about it until my opa's talked or other people have spoken, seeing the impact that it's had on them and how people have actually changed after knowing these events, it's astounding, and it's so important that we keep on sharing it. So I guess I have a moral responsibility to continue my opa's work because I'm through his family line. But all in all, our whole generation has a moral responsibility to make sure that we keep on raising awareness about things. And even if we can't make big changes, trying to do little steps or just little things that can create a small change to impact a larger one.
If I can just follow that up, can I just follow that up,
Please.
Richard,
Yes,
by
please.
saying the Holocaust Education Trusts, for example, they run these lessons from Auschwitz and do a lot of Holocaust education. And some of the youngsters who go to Auschwitz on their lessons from Auschwitz project, you know, they come back unbelievably moved and enthusiastic to carry on the work and to talk to their fellow pupils in schools and things, to what they saw and what they witnessed, and perhaps even to tell them of the survivor who gave a talk to them before they went to Auschwitz. And I must say, you know, the effect it has on students is absolutely amazing. You hear time and time again of all the talks that they've heard in the school year, the one that given by a survivor is the one that they all seem to, you know, react to most and remember the most. And let me just give you an example of a thing that happened to me some years ago. I was speaking in a school. It was a bog standard comprehensive school, 180 children I was talking to in their hall. And when it was finished, and some come up to you and ask you questions because they don't like asking it in the body of the hall with all these other, you know, peers about.
Mm.
And they asked me a question, I answered it. And about a week later, I got an email from the teacher thanking me so much for coming. The students were still talking about it. But he said, you might just like to know the little girl who waited patiently at the end of the queue, waiting to ask a question, and then asked you a question. I can't even recall, you know, the girl or the question. He said, that girl is a selective mute. And this was the first time she ever asked a question in school. So you begin to realize how important it is that we do carry on giving these talks.
Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Kerim and Dilnaz, Stephen goes into schools and talks about things that happened literally generations ago now. You are talking about something which is happening right now, which is happening today to your own family. Do you feel the West, the world understands what is happening in the Uyghur regions today?
Siz bugün hazırma West'deki memleketlerine hükümetleri hazır Uygurlar bu vatandaşların tam düşünü atamdı bizce.
Ular belki bizden yaxşı düşün deb o'ylayman bu memleketlarniki, mesela devletniki odamlari. Ama Xitoy bilan bo'lgan manfaatni deb tushunmaslikka harakat qilmayapti. Zo'miz tushunmaslikka sevyapti hozir. Bo'lmasa bizni yaxshi tushunadi.
So he says that he believes that the Western governments understand the situation better than us, but they're just assuming that they don't know much because of their relationship with China. So they want us from here do a lot of work, and basically, yeah, he's saying that because of the relationship with China, they're trying to act as if they don't know about the situation there, but actually they do know more than us.
Biz şu hazır sırtı durup, misal, u yerden kelgen xabar orqali nurg'un narsani bilyapmizda. Hukumatning degan maxsus axborot markazlari bor, u yerga evatida odamlar bor. Shu odamlar orqali bizning natijasi yo'q, jiq narsani bilib bo'ladi. Ammo bilib turib, hozir nima uchun ular qarshi yoki u to'xtatish uchun harakat qilmaydi degan holda Xitoydan kelgan manfaatni qiyolmayapti. Ya'ni ko'ngli uzamayapti.
So the reason he believes that they know more than us is because we just listening from witnesses who escaped from China, from some kind of resources that we have that doesn't describe fully about what is happening there. But the government does have like maybe spies or their people or their embassies who are in China, and they should know more things that is happening there than us. They should have more data and resources than us.
Stephen in particular, does this answer resonate with you? Governments know what's going on there, but they're not necessarily sharing what they know, and they're not necessarily doing anything about it?
I think you're absolutely right. It does, and because it's a very difficult position for them to be in. I think one of the most effective ways you could do it, for example, we've now got the Winter Olympic Games that are on in China, right? Why can't all these nations, these democratic nations that we have around the world, why can't they say, right, we are not going to come to China for the Winter Olympic Games? Any sort of event like that puts China on the pedestal. If you could say no, but of course you can't do that because all these people who invest all this money that's gone into preparing all these athletes for all these things that are going on, and the whole thing gets very muddy and muddled then, and nothing then gets done. That's the tragedy.
As you've anticipated my next question. Thank you very much. No, I would like to talk about the Olympics because, as Stephen says, the Winter Olympics have just begun in Beijing. We're a week into the Olympics. You may know that as the Games began, the Muslim Council of Britain issued a statement asking broadcasters, influencers, and athletes to recognize the Winter Games for what they are, the Genocide Games. This is a quote from the Muslim Council of Britain. Some brave athletes have taken a stand and have refused to take part in solidarity with the victims. Others are making important gestures to ensure their plight does not go ignored. The Muslim Council of Britain calls upon everyone involved, including broadcasters and sponsors, to use every opportunity to raise awareness around the plight of the Uyghur people. Zahra Mohammed, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, dubbed them the Genocide Games. But there is another point of view. I'd like to read out a quote from the head of the American Olympic Committee, who has another view. The future of amateur sport in the United States is now being threatened as a result of the efforts of certain individuals and groups to involve sport in foreign political affairs, and to keep American athletes out of the Olympic Games. It becomes the duty of those charged with the administration of amateur sports to fight off this invasion. Shall the American athlete be made a martyr to a cause not his own? The Olympic Games were revived in order to encourage the development and extension of international amity and goodwill in a world filled with intolerance, persecution, hatred, and war. The great success of the Games is due to the precautions taken to guard them against entanglement in political, religious, or class controversies. To involve them in the present Jew-Nazi altercation would completely invert the object of the Games. And that's Avery Brundage writing in 1935 against a boycott of the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Maggie, a question for you as a student of PE, history, and psychology. Is it appropriate, is it effective, is it meaningful to boycott the Olympic Games as a way of arguing against persecution and genocide?
I think it depends on the view that people take, because some people will say that sport and politics are kind of inextricably linked, and therefore if you disagree with the views of, say, in 1936, the Berlin Games, which everybody should, but if you disagreed with the view, you should boycott. However, other people would say that the Olympic Games were actually founded to unite nations, preserve human dignity, kind of showcase the best array of sport. And in a sense, people have dedicated their whole lives to sport. Their families have put everything on the line to get them to where they are today. So is it fair to ask someone to stop, to give up their life dream because of something that not necessarily isn't happening to them, but it's happening somewhere else? And will the boycott bring attention to it, and will it impact it as much? Because things are often boycotted, but often nothing comes about it. So it's a hard one because you can boycott in. So I think the GB team haven't sent over any officials or judges, which is a semi-form of boycott because they've said, look, we're not actively supporting this and we're not helping you out. However, they can't do it to the athletes to not send them. But if you do there are ways to do it, such as in like Mexico in 1968, like Smith and Carlos in the 200 meters, when they were on the podium, they raised their hands for Black Power and they wore no socks, no shoes, to show like Black African American poverty. And through doing that and through their protest, they gained awareness for their cause. So I think you can
Maggie, I don't know if I'm the only one who's seeing Maggie freeze.
Yes,
Okay.
I saw a freeze.
Okay. Maggie, stay with us. I'll come back to you as soon as I can. But on the subject of the Olympics, Kerim and Dilnaz, China is already hosting its second Olympic Games of the 21st century, 2008, 2022. Is that appropriate? Does it present China in a good light that it does not deserve?
Xigirma birinchi asrda ikkinchi qatim bo'lsa Olimpikni muvaffaq qilgan. Shu sizcha bu to'g'rimi? Sizcha bu Xitoyniyligi bizni taqim olqatamdi?
Or does it not matter? Is it genuinely a question of sports and it doesn't matter where it takes place?
Ya da bir alakası yok mu?
Bu eğer öz neme Olimpikning o'zi bu inson haqlariga ahamiyat beradigan bunday bir davlat o'tkaziladigan yoki bo'lmaydi, insonlikqa yaxshilik akilish uchun o'tkaziladigan bunday bir faoliyat bo'lgan bo'lsa, u vaqtda Xitoyda o'tkazilgani bu to'g'ri bo'lmaydi. Chunki Xitoy inson haqlarini qatlam qilish bilan, bir millatni qatlam qilish bilan dafsan qilayotgan, uning butun huquqlarini, butun madaniyatlarini vayron bilan bo'layotgan bir millatni biz emas, bizdan boshqa o'zining ichidagi hamma millatlarni ashunday o'z assimilyatsiya qilish yoki yo'q qilish uchun harakat qilayotgan bir diktator bir o'zi davlatni o'tkazish, agar bu inson haqlariga ahamiyat beradigan bir o'zi kompaniya shirkatning bo'lsa, bu tashkilot bo'lsa, bu olimpik degani. Bunday hayot o'tkazish bu olimpikka to'g'ri bo'lmaydi. Olimpikniki yuz obro'yig'imi to'g'ri bo'lmaydi. Bu ammo buniki Xitoyga bir foyda keladigan tarafi nima degan vaqtda Xitoy uni faqat o'zi o'tkazishdagi maqsad o'ziniki undaq diktator bir davlat emasligini ifodalash uchun qilayotgan bir ish endi. Lekin buning bilan o'zini aqatanmaydi Xitoy.
So Olympics is done because they believe that they will respect human rights laws and they want to contribute to create a better world, a peaceful world. However, if Olympics' main reasons are this, then doing the Olympic in China is very wrong, because China is a place where it's doing genocide towards Uyghurs. It's abolishing the human rights laws, not only towards Uyghurs, but Tibetans, Hong Kongers, even Han Chinese people. So it's a place where the government is crushing people, they're assimilating people. And so this will lead the Olympics to have that the standard will lower, because their main reasons are to create a better world, but they're taking place in a place where genocide is happening. When it comes to China, I mean, nothing will happen to them. They're just trying to show us, prove us that they were right from the beginning, that they are not dictators, they are not doing anything wrong, they're not terrorizing, they're not like abolishing the human rights laws. They just think that by doing this Olympics in Beijing, it might help them to show it might help them to prove that they're right, but we know that it's wrong. What they're doing from the beginning is wrong. So, yeah.
Misal Xitoyniki ichidagi butun Xitoyniki eski qilqilari yana Xitoy Kommunistik Partiyasining qilayotgan eski ishlarini o'zini butun dunyo bilib bo'lgan vaqtda, shunday keng ko'lamda hamma narsani bilib bo'lgan vaqtda, uni kichkina bir narsani yepish orqali o'zini bunday bir go'zal bir sistema, yana Kommunistik Partiya shunday bir go'zal bir partiya ekanligini ifodalash mumkin emas.
So now that everyone or most people around the world knows what China is doing, they can't just close up and hide what they're doing by doing the Olympics in Beijing.
Lekin Xitoy davomli shunga o'xshash odam aldash bilan davomli shunga o'xshaydi. Dunyoni aldaymi deb Xitoyni aldaydi.
So he says that the Chinese government have been doing such things for a very long time. They have tried to lie to the government saying, oh, we're not doing this. We're actually ruling the country in a very right way. We are respecting the human rights laws. But in reality, they're doing the opposite.
Thank you. Dilnaz, well, we have you front and center. Okay, so we set aside whether the Olympics will make any difference or not. It does put the focus on China. Maggie mentioned to me when we spoke last week that a lot of her classmates and friends learn about social causes through social media. As a university, first-year university student studying maths here in the UK, do you see causes appearing and disappearing on this? I don't know if you're on TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat where you are, but do you see these causes appearing on social media, and do you think it makes any difference?
I mean, social media is a great platform to teach people about what is happening around the world by posting videos about genocides that are going around the world, including the Uyghurs, Kashmir, and so many others. Tigray, people are learning about the horrific things that are happening around the world. Even when we go to the past, people learn actually through social media, they learn a lot about Holocaust. That's why I learned a lot about Holocaust through social media. But the only thing is that social media is where we can engage people and teach people about the causes, but we can't do much about it more than that. However, people, I think they're a bit too lazy. Some people, they just read it and just ignore about it. They just read a post about Holocaust, for example, and then half an hour later, they just forget about it. It's not a good sign at this point, but I would say social media is a great platform to teach people about different causes. Yeah.
Maggie, what's your response to that? Social media, is it doing any good? Is it educating? Is it driving any change?
I think to an extent it drives change, because I think especially for me and a lot of my classmates, it did raise awareness of the genocide going on. But I would say that aside from the posts that sort of state what's going on, I mean, I think I'm not really too sure, but I don't think anybody really, apart from the authorities, knows exactly what's going on. So I do think it spreads a lot of sort of fake information and news that isn't true. So when you're talking about using social media to educate people, it's a great tool to educate people, because if I share one thing or someone else shares one thing, that goes to hundreds of people. And then if they share it on, that's another 100. But you have to be careful with what is false information and what is true. And I think with this kind of area, it would be useful if more sort of verified accounts and things that have been factually checked were published. And unfortunately, there's not a blocker. Anyone can say anything, which is a good thing about social media, but also a bad thing. So I think it is a good way to raise awareness, but I think it needs to kind of be interpreted with caution when we're trying to kind of elicit change through it.
Thank you. All right, you've listened to my questions for long enough. I will open up the floor to questions now. Could you please put your questions, there's a choice. You have two boxes, the chat or the Q&A. Could you please put your questions in the Q&A? And if possible, I'll favor the broadest possible questions that give all four of our panelists a chance to respond to them. While you type your questions, I'm going to throw out one more for Stephen. It's a small question. What lessons have we learned from the Holocaust? And what lessons have we not learned from the Holocaust?
That's a huge question. The lessons that I suppose what we've learned from the Holocaust is man's inhumanity to man, and that there are despotic people in the world like pathogenic bacteria that are everywhere in the world. There are people in the world who will do anything. They will trample on anyone, and they will murder as many people as they want in order to get what they particularly are striving for. The other part of the question, what was it again?
What have we not learned? What have we learned and what have we not learned?
Yes, right. What we've not learned is that people forget. You've got the rise of neo-Nazis. You've got the rise of xenophobia. You've got people who hate Muslims. You've got people who hate blacks. But it's getting better. I think it is getting better. I heard a very interesting story the other day of a youngster who, I think she might have been in either the top primary school or lower secondary school, who came back home from a day at school and, like all young children, enthusiastically talked to her mum about what she'd been doing and what she'd been thinking about all day when she was at school. And she said to her mum, "There's a lovely new girl that's joined our class, and she's really nice, and she lives in Nigeria." And so her mum said, "Is she black?" And the girl said, "Oh, I don't know." And I think that in itself, you begin to get, there is hope that people are becoming more and more integrated, more and more acceptable to other people that there are about, I think.
It's a lovely story. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. We have started getting some questions from the audience. Thank you very much. I'll start with a very concrete one from Sheldon Stone. Thank you very much for this. I think for all four of our panelists, Stephen, Kerim, Dilnaz, and Maggie, what two concrete asks would you make of this audience? Much more practical than my questions. What do you want the audience to do? I'll start with Kerim.
Bugün katnaşan adamlardan ne isteysiz? Ne kılışını isteysiz?
Bizning isteydiğimiz hazır bütün dünya hamda bizniki vatan bulup atkan bir tragediyani ve zulümni hemmeden bilip oldu. Hem bunun faqatla amaliy harakat bilan uni to'xtatish, terbiye o'tish, shunga yordam qilish. Mayli davlat olsun, mayli tashkilot olsun, mayli shaxsiylar olsun, shunga kuch chiqarishni umid qilamiz.
Sorry, just to introduce myself, Rahima Mahmoud. I'm here to assist Dilnaz. And the question, I just gonna help her to repeat that question in Uyghur. Yeah. And the mushu hazırki qırğınçılık boğatıdı. And this is mushu başqalardan işki narsa, işki talep qılmaqçı bolsunuz. Bu işki talabınız neymi? Başqalarına mushu'nga yardım qilish uchun işki talabınız.
İşki talep o'zi birisi mushu hukumatlarning o'zini hozir qaysi davlatlar butun dunyo bilib oldi. Bilib olgan davlatlarni harakatga o'tkazishga kuch chiqarish. Ya'ni tashkilotlar olsun, shaxsiylar olsun. İkincisi şu harakatga o'tgandan keyin u nemaning o'zini vatandagi shu bo'layotgan zulmni to'xtatishga yana nima qilish endi shu yo'l etishni.
Odatdagi xalqlarninki masalan nima ish qila oladi qo'ldan keladigan masalan balkim ashi to'g'riliq.
Odatdagi xalq, biz shu odatdagi bir xalq, endi odatdagi xalq nima ish qila oladi degan vaqtida, u o'zining bir ifodasi orqali hukumatga shu ishniki xato bir ish ekanligini, bir zulm ekanligini hukumatga anglata oladi. Qo'ldan mush ish keladi endi.
Okay, so I just rephrased the question that for two asks is one, most importantly, that the world already know, including the people in this country, but we still need the awareness raising, and so that the people, that they use their power to put pressure on the government so the government can act. That's the most important thing, that when government can act, that will make a difference. So that for government to act, it has to be the people have to put that pressure. And so that is my answer. And I really hope that people can believe their own power to contact their own the MPs and to try to ask them to put pressure on the government so the government can change its behavior and recognize the genocide is happening.
Thank you. Dilnaz, a very specific question for you from Marion. If you can't get through to your family with phone calls, is there any other way to find out what's happening, what's really happening to your relatives? From Marion.
I mean, till today we have tried many ways. We have asked like our friends and people who we contact closely, and even they don't know what have happened to their relatives who live in Uzbekistan. We have called them many times. Even today we do call them. Every month maybe we call them and see maybe if one of them pick up the phone, but till today we haven't. They haven't picked up the phones. Also, I have been in contact with my MP, and he has been in contact with the Chinese embassy. And the only response we got from them was that they are living a happy, normal life. That's what the Chinese embassy said in the letter. Still, we try to receive a response from them, but they haven't sent us an answer.
A question that I think has been posed to Stephen and to Kerim from Jane and Andrew. Stephen, does the pain of what you have endured ever diminish?
Yes, as time goes on, it does diminish. And one of the things students often ask me in class is, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you in the camps? And I always answer by saying, I learned how to hate. You know, hatred is something that we all have in us, but fortunately, we all keep it well under control. But, you know, as far as I was concerned, the only good German was a dead German when, you know, as we were coming to the end of the war and after the war too. And it takes time to get this hatred out of your system. And if you don't get that hatred out of your system, you cannot be at peace with yourself. I mean, hatred is like a sort of cancer of the mind, if you like. It's there and you have to get rid of it. And luckily for me, I've been able to get rid of it out of my system. Yet there is just no room for hatred in my heart.
Karima, the same question to you. Does the pain diminish with time? And I know this is much more current for you than it is for Stephen.
So you want me to explain that, Dilnaz? Азыркы суалы амдым мабу неме Holocaust тогурлукму сорди мушу Holocaust'тин кийинки өзүңүздүнки мушу сизге зыянкечлик кылып атканларга болгон маселен нефрет неме бу азыр мушундак бир нефретму я кандак бир неме So can you just rephrase that question again?
Simply, does the pain of what you have been through diminish with time?
Sizce muşu hazırki bütün işçinizdeki muşu açık la sizce yılların ötüşü bilen yoqap ketemi, tügep ketemi?
Hem de meneki şahsiyet, menek içimdeki bu nefret şu meni ölge vakti, ben ölge vakti bırakıp ketdim. Başka o ben bir zaman ötke vakti ben unutup ketiş asla mümkün emez.
For me, as I am living this pain at the moment, and I don't think it won't be possible to diminish, because I believe I might, carry it to my next life. So until I die, I'm living, and I believe I will be living with this.
Thank you. Two related questions, both for Dilnaz. An interesting one for you as a university student. Do British universities, so it's a question about Chinese students who are studying at British universities. Do British universities have a responsibility to educate those visiting Chinese students about what's happening in the Uyghur regions in their country?
I believe that universities have not only to Chinese students, but to all students who are studying in the university, to teach them about what is happening in Uzbekistan. Students, not only Chinese students, but all students must know about the cause. So yeah, they do have responsibility to teach about the cause.
Great. And then for both, I think for both Dilnaz and Kerim, do you feel safe as activists for the Uyghur community in the UK? China has a very long reach. Do you feel safe in this country, knowing this, what the CCP does, the Chinese Communist Party does to activists even abroad?
Hem de işkinlağa bu sual, hem hazır Xitayninki kolunun qanchalik uzunluğunu biz bilimiz. Chet eldeki bolup mu şundaq fəaliyyətçilərə ziyankeşlik qılğan ahvallar mövcud. Şunun üçün işkinlağı müşədə hazır Angliyada özünlər bexətər his qılamızlar. Müşü sual.
Angliyada bexatar his qilamiz, ama herhalde bunun bir ehtiyat bilen muamele qilamiz. Bazı yerlik vaqt herhalde bir ehtiyat bilen turamiz. Hem devlet, hemen devletki kapaletke bir vecih var. Özümüz xalqaya berip vakiza qılmaymiz. Adetте men O'rta Osiyodan o'sha chiqqili 2002da chiqqan bo'lsam 20 yil bo'ldi bormoqli. Demakki nima degan vaqtda vatandan sirt bo'lsa-mu Xitoy O'rta Osiyodan mesela Turkiyadan aketdi bolalarimizni. Demakki shundaq sharoitda har holda shu Angliyaning ichidami ham halqi nima desak bo'ldi endi. O'sha Xitoyniki dumbug'inchildigan yerlarga unchalar bormayman odatda. Nima bu eng oddiysi bizni ko'nglimizga bir zarar verishi mumkin, bizga dashnom berishi mumkin. Ko'nglimiz u yerda suv ichmaydi misol undaq yerga vaqtida. Shuning uchun eng oddiysi shunchalik bir bizga askilik qilgan bir tarafni o'ylab bo'lsa bormayman.
Well, generally speaking, feel safe in this country, but with caution. So I pick where to go, where to speak, and who to mix. Also, like countries, Central Asian countries, I left in 2002. I never went back, although I really want to go, but I don't feel it's the right thing because I know what can happen. So yes, I feel safe, but with caution. I have to be very careful who to mix, and so try to avoid any kind of situation.
Thank you. And then Dilnaz and Kerim, I'm getting variations of the same question from many, many different members of the audience. All variations on what can we do to stop what is happening in the Uyghur regions. It's being phrased in lots of different ways from many different people, but it all boils down to what can we do?
From my view, I mean, for example, I'm a student. I can't do much like political things. So what simple things to do is basically educate people around you, join the protests that are happening, but also to write letters to your MP, asking them to take serious actions in the parliament, and also ask the government to take serious political actions.
And does your father have a response to that?
I think my father answered to that question earlier. So his answer was to basically ask MPs to take actions in Parliament.
Right. Thank you. I was afraid this would happen. There are many more questions from the audience than we can answer in the time that we have. And I am going to use my powers as the moderator to ask a final question myself. So thank you to everybody who has submitted questions. A very broad question, and I apologize, it's quite a long one, for all four of our panelists, for Stephen, for Kerim, for Dilnaz, and for Maggie. Before the Holocaust, there was a general understanding among nations that what happened within the borders of a country was pretty much that country's business. It was not for any one country to intervene in the affairs of another country. For example, it was no country saw it as its duty to intervene in the Ottoman Empire, to protect Armenians in 1915. And indeed, the Allies' war on the Nazis was never primarily about saving Jews from the Holocaust. Now, the enormity of the Holocaust changed that mindset, at least somewhat, in what we call the West. Witness NATO's intervention in Bosnia, for example, which was partly to protect Bosnian Muslims. And the conviction in Germany just a few weeks ago of a Syrian military officer for torturing people in that country's civil war. He was convicted in Germany and is being imprisoned in Germany. China has very aggressively pushed back against this notion that one country should intervene in another country to protect human rights of oppressed minorities. But here's my question. Are we returning to a pre-Holocaust world where countries feel they can and should do whatever they like within their own borders? Stephen, you have the biggest perspective of any of us on this. I'll start with you.
I'll say it in two words: the United Nations. What are they doing? Here we have the pinnacle, if you like, of all the nations in the world. It was set up because of the Nazi atrocities after the Second World War had ended. And yet I find that you get very, very little action on their part to bring to the world attention of what's happening in these various countries. And I always think the only way that you'll ever be able to do anything about it is to stop any sort of promotion that countries have, like the Olympic Games, or it may be the World Cup, or whatever it may be. That's something that should be, those countries should be banned from holding them until they have a more liberal policy in the countries and the peoples and the minorities that they serve. And I found just one thing, because I know I'm not going to get another word in from now, is to say our Chinese friends, it's terrible for them. For me, it's 80 odd years ago. For them, it's happening right now. And that makes it very, very painful indeed. And I feel very sorry for them.
Maggie, I know this is a big question, but I also know you're approaching history A level, so I'm going to throw it to you as well. Are we in a world where countries feel like they can and do whatever they like within their own borders without anybody else interfering from the outside?
I think we're in a place where I wouldn't say they don't want to interfere, but I'd say people have other priorities. I'd say, like, especially with COVID and like that kind of like unexpected climate, like everything's kind of, you can go and help, but they have, like, governments particularly, they want to stay in power their priorities are they're very self-interested in keeping themselves in power, keeping their country going, gaining support from their country. I think certain, like, I do, as a population, I think we want to help everybody. Like, well, in my view, I definitely do. You want to help as many people as you can. You want everyone to feel safe. You want everyone to feel happy and live like fulfilled lives. But I think that as sort of governments and sort of institutes of power go, they're kind of more self-orientated and less inclined to help. But I think if we can gradually sort of pressurize and make the views of the country well known, that I'd say definitely from among kind of my cohort, people want to help people. If we can make those sort of views known, then I think we could move towards a kind of more, I'd say, like collectivist world where we actually are United Nations and start to tackle these sorts of problems.
Let's end on that hopeful note then. Thank you very much, Maggie. And thank you to all 4 of our panelists for sharing their extraordinary experiences, their wisdom, their insight, their thoughts, their experiences. Stephen, Kerim, Dilnaz, Maggie, thank you all very much for spending this evening with us. And I will hand over to Anita Peleg of Generation to Generation and Rahima Mahmood, translator extraordinaire, but also Executive Director of Stop Uyghur Genocide.
Thank you, Richard. So as Richard said, my name is Anita Peleg. I'm Chair of Trustees of Generation to Generation. First, I'd like to thank all our participants for a really engaging and important discussion. Generation to Generation, as many of you know, enables descendants and friends of Holocaust survivors tell their family stories. We do this particularly to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust continue to be learned. And just as Stephen and Maggie said, this has to be a really, really important purpose. We present stories of Holocaust survivors across a range of audiences in order to create awareness of how the seeds of hate can grow into racism and genocide. And we try to create empathy for other groups currently suffering discrimination. So an evening like this, where we can combine and share experiences between Holocaust survivors and victims of the Uyghur genocide, is particularly important. And Stephen and Maggie and Kerim and Dilnaz have shown us how important it is for these stories to be passed from generation to generation so that we can create awareness and challenge discrimination and hatred in all its forms. So tonight, I'm really pleased that we joined with René Cassin and Stop Uyghur Genocide. It is our hope that as a result of this and other conversations, that you, our audience, will join us in collaborating, in standing together with the Uyghur community and speaking out, making people aware and being advocates for change. I think it's really important. It's like Kerim said, we must believe in our own power to be advocates for change. Because if we don't believe in that, then another Holocaust happens and the Uyghur genocide happens. So if we believe in our own power and we do little actions, then we can ensure that the Holocaust is not forgotten and its legacy is put to good use for the future. I'd like to invite Rahima Mahmood, the Executive Director of Stop Uyghur Genocide, to say final words.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it's such a great evening. And as Executive Director of Stop Uyghur Genocide, I'd like to thank everyone who joined. And it has been a privilege to share in this conversation between Stephen, Maggie, Dilnaz, and Kerim Hajim. And I'm deeply moved by their resilience, compassion, and solidarity. The younger generation's commitment to a better future is a constant source of hope. I would like to thank René Cassin and Generation to Generation and Richard for offering the Uyghur people a platform to share our story as part of their commemorations around Holocaust Memorial Day. Jewish communities have been an invaluable ally to the Uyghurs. At every opportunity, the community has amplified the crisis occurring in the Uyghur region. From supporting parliamentary actions, speaking out at protests, donating to our cause. In turn, I have been inspired by the fierce resilience of the Jewish community in the face of a history of persecution. And I look forward to our two communities continuing to tell each other's stories. And finally, I would like to just answer the questions to people want to know what we can do to help. So number one thing is follow Stop Uyghur Genocide. The social media, if you use Twitter, Instagram or Facebook, or follow me, and also our website, we have very clear actions, many different campaigns that is happening. So we would like you to join, as simple as some petitions. You can sign your name, or join as a volunteer to support the Stop Uyghur Genocide work. So I would like to thank you again for that question. It really, really touches my heart when people come up to me and ask me, what can I do? Also, I would encourage people to be mindful when you shopping, when you, especially young teenagers, they're big consumer of a lot of electronic products and other. So check if you can, get alternative rather than made in China. Please do, because there are many Uyghurs used as slave labor in all parts of China. And therefore, all the goods, we believe, most of the products that we are using, that there is possibility that Uyghur slave labor involved. So I would ask you to be mindful when you shop, and that can really hurt the economy, the Chinese power. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahima. And thank you, Richard, for facilitating what's been really an inspiring conversation. Stephen, Maggie, Dilnaz, Kerim, sharing your stories with everyone. I mean, this is what humanity is about. It's about learning, it's about sharing, and most importantly, it's about reflecting and making the right decisions. So in the future, what if becomes an irrelevant question. Thank you very much to our participants, and have a lovely evening.